also bring out depression and anxiety. So it plays out in different ways.
So let me ask you this, Alberto, or pretty soon Dr. Gomez. um, Specifically within the frame of this conversation, when it comes to the history of Black people being in the United States, has the trauma that our fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers and mothers went through, is that affecting where we're at today as a Black culture when it comes to how we approach things? Is it trauma still there for us?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me, for sure. There's other doctors too, and there's actually a doctor here in San Diego. His name is Dr. Rodney Hood. He's actually, yeah, if you're familiar with him, he's actually, I got in contact with him and he showed me a manuscript that he's working on, kind of basically what you're talking about discussing, but it's really intergenerational trauma, right? And how that plays out. And so that can play out in many different ways. The most clear-cut way is biologically, right? When during the course of our lifespan, we have, everybody knows about DNA, but most people don't know how it kind of plays out. We don't express all our DNA genes all at one point, right? Different situations in different environments in life, different stressors start causing our DNA to express certain parts of it. And so if we have our grandparents, grandparents, and their DNA sequence expressing certain parts, it starts adding up, right? So biologically, if our grandparents were in a very stressful situation and our body basically deems that, hey, we need to express these certain genes to increase our survivability, it's going to express it more. And then when the next generation comes, if it continues, it starts becoming reinforced, right? But also in terms of like the social aspect of it, right? Trauma, it really affects the way we see the world, how we see others, and how we see ourselves. And so if our parents have a certain trauma that they experience in their life, they're going to interact with us in some way, right? So it plays out in many different ways, logically, socially, mentally. And so to say that all that trauma that happens to us, is as well, there's been a good study that integration. African American, I'm not sure it's not as popular, right? Again, Dr. Rodney Hood, he's looked at it and he's brought up he's basically come up with a term called post-traumatic sleep stress disorder, right? So the history of slavery and how that changed the genetics and how heart health is seen for Black people now currently, and how it could stem from that history. So those things that our parents and our grandparents went through, that stuff gets passed along until somebody does something about it, and that somebody is usually us, and how we deal with our stress, and how even though biologically, emotionally, mentally, our bodies and minds might tell us to do one thing, having that awareness, right? That self-awareness to still make the decision that although everything in your body is telling you don't do this other thing, what the right decision in mitigating the harm that action can do, right? So it plays out in a lot of different parts. But yeah, I would say that for sure, all that stuff, hundreds of years of slavery, how do you expect that to be gone after they abolish it? And then we got decades of segregation, and then that's over, and they're still discriminating. So how do we expect all of that to be gone in the blink of an eye just because the law changed?
Yeah. I love what you're saying, man. We had this discussion, and one of the things that you said with the generational trauma, like I kind of resonate with that. Why? Is because just when I was working on myself, right? Because I think that's something that a lot of us have to do as we get to a certain age, and start trying to reflect on yourself, look yourself in the mirror, understand who this person is and why you make the decisions you make, right? And I discovered NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. I think we've had somebody on the show who talked about it, and that's it's kind of like the scientific thing, study of how the brain actually works,
Mhm.
the subconscious and the brain works.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So a lot of people think the subconscious is this holistic thing, like, oh, it's energy, but there is energy, right? But it's because one of the things to easily explain what the subconscious is, it's like if you're breathing, like you showed me how to breathe. Now you taught me how to breathe and how to think about it. But in breathing, to survive, you don't think about it. So where does that come from? Right? If you have to change it up, then you start like thinking about it, right? So that's where the subconscious is, things that, and it kind of is part of the DNA. And it goes back to like the trauma. A lot of the things that you download when you're young is passed down, even before birth, right?
So, and you got to think there's a lot, if you want to kind of compare it to the neurology of it, the subconscious, that's the subcortical parts of our brain, right? So that's the amygdala. That's the parts that in our brain is very instinctual.
Right.
Amygdala, we don't have much control over it.
Right.
But in terms of the breathing, right, in the literature, they call it top down.
Right.
So using our executive functioning to regulate those subcortical areas.
Right.
Right. And so, the subconscious it's a mystery to us. We don't really know how it's wired, how it's working.
Right.
But using, again, that top down process.
Right.
To kind of, and the biggest trick to it. So I do, my main approach in therapy is called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy.
Right.
And this type of therapy really focuses on values.
Uh-huh.
And so one of the big things about it, though, is how we get ourselves to behave in a certain way, right?
Right.
And a lot of times, we're taught, we learn, it's by power, forcing ourselves, right?
Right.
By pushing others. And that's honestly, it's very hurtful to do it that way. So it's learning how to build some self-compassion, grace with yourself. And now you're like an orchestra, right? You're just facilitating processes, but you're not fighting, you're not resisting, you're finding the flow of yourself, right? In your thoughts, in your feelings, in the first thing is to build that awareness, so then that you can find little loopholes to jump in and now take on a new behavior, right? And see how that feels. And then finding these patterns enough so that you can soon begin to know how to interrupt these cycles that tend to repeat itself, especially in terms of intergenerational trauma, right?
Right, because that's a comfort zone. That's like that.
So how does all that lead to addiction?
Can you be more specific? Actually?
Well, I look at it as sometimes people get addicted to things because, especially our community, specifically I'm thinking about, the crack epidemic and things of that nature, is not that we're genetically predisposed to, being more addicted to these things, but somehow because of our environment, we are trying to escape whatever issues that we have going on.
Trying to self-relieve, right?
So how does trauma lead to addiction?
So, in terms of trauma, and again, so I'll say this, most of the world experiences at least more than one trauma, but 70% of us recover from it. Only about 30% get PTSD, right? So in most cases, the human mind is very resilient to adversity and trauma, right? Now, when you start adding more trauma, it becomes harder for that individual to recover, right? So it starts piling up, right? I don't know if you're aware of the ACEs studies. There's a study that Kaiser did, and they looked at young children in adverse childhood events. That's what ACE stands for, adverse childhood events. And they found that the more adverse events that these people had at childhood, the more susceptible they were to mental disorders, substance use, right? All the bad stuff. So in terms of your question in substance use, when the trauma starts building up, you start looking for an escape. You look for something to self-relieve, right? Even if it is for that quick 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a whole day, right? It's our instincts to find some relief, right? Because we can handle so much stress, especially when we're not prepared for it, right? That's what I've learned when I looked at my history and everything I learned, and learning how people do really hard stuff. They prepare themselves for that stress. That's what boot camp is for, right? It preps us for that. But when you're thrown in the fire and you don't get a chance to catch your breath and it keeps piling on,
Right.
if you see a little cave that you can just catch your breath for and it just happens to be a crack pipe, who can blame that person, really? Right?
Mm.
You should give me an aha moment.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Share with me.
No, for
please.
me personally.
Oh, okay.
I was like, damn. But yeah, this is my question, different one that because there's these gurus out here right now who are saying embrace the trauma. So that's how you kind of discover the real you, right?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
And a lot of, and I'll say more young men are listening to that. Now, I think how you deal with trauma is different for every demographic, right?
Yeah.
You know, so, but at the same time too, when you have like, and I'm going to say the name, like people like David Goggins,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
So it's like,
It's a hard.
yeah. Embrace the suck, you know what I'm saying?
Hey, he's definitely prepped for that stress, man.
Right, you know, and people are listening to that, right? Is that a way of dealing with trauma, or is that a bad or good way, you would say?
I mean, it all depends, right, on
Right.
how the person perceives it and what they deal with that information, right? I will say this: the most effective treatment known today for PTSD is prolonged exposure. So it's literally narrating your trauma in the United States, narrating your trauma over and over again. And usually, when people start this therapy, they're just saying the story like verbatim, whatever, right? They're kind of numb to it.
Mm-hmm.
But saying the story enough kind of
Mhm.
opens these subconscious channels, right?
Right.
It's that you start turning on those subcortical things that you might have numbed out before people even get there. Though they start avoiding therapy, right?
Mm.
And this is again with PTSD, with trauma. What that kind of shows is that trauma is an experience, just like any other experience, right?
Mhm.
But in our brain, it's a very important experience. And we
Right.
got to pay attention to all those details because our life was at threat, right?
Mhm.
And so we hyper focus on those details, and our subconscious, our mind, our perception starts to look for those cues to let us know, like, hey, this might happen again. And so we tend to avoid and avoid those situations to minimize the risk. But the reality is that when you expose yourself, because with PTSD, people then, if the water bottle was part of your trauma, now you don't want to even look at a water bottle.
Right.
But it's just the water bottle, right? So getting that information in your head, right, so that you can essentially process those emotions so that this water bottle can once again be just a water bottle instead of a threat to you.
So you're kind of saying you got to face that. You got to face that.
You got to face it in a healthy way. You can't just, again, you got to prepare for that stress. You always got to prepare for the stress. You can't throw yourself in there and expect it to be gone in a day, right?
Right.
So the exposure is just your brain rewiring that information so that there's not such a heightened sense of emotion attached to it.
Mm.
And so that's what our subcortical part of our brain, the important part of our brain, the number one priority is to keep us alive. So anything that threatens our survivability, our brain starts programming it.
Fight or flight.
Pay attention. Yeah,
Right.
Fight or flight. Pay
Right.
attention to that. Hey, that's safe. Oh, that's good and pleasurable. That's where we're good, right? And so our brain's always doing this stuff all day without us even noticing. And so if we're not, again, practicing that awareness,
right,
that my heart starts racing when I see this water bottle, right? And then you get stuck with the decision: do I just avoid it, or do I keep exposing myself to this thing so that it doesn't have this power over me?
So let me ask you this: I've seen this on like Instagram and stuff, and it's funny, but I actually know there's something really harmful attached to it for these people. So like when you show, not the "Are You My Baby Daddy" show, but he would have shows like people, like this lady was scared of olives. Like you bring out like a jar of olives, she like runs.
Yeah,
right.
And then I seen a lady afraid of cotton balls.
There's one afraid of peaches, right?
I didn't see that one.
I think I know what you're talking about.
But how was someone? And we could go on and ask more. How does someone like overcome something like that? And first of all, how do you get scared of something like that?
Right.
Something like that.
Hey, people can be scared of anything, man, if the situation's set up. But in the scenario you're explaining, it's not helpful because we're not helping the person feel safe in that situation, right? We're kind of reinforcing that threat response.
Well, they run.
Yeah, do they chase them with it?
Yeah, they chase them with
yeah,
it.
that's not helping.
Yeah.
That's not helping. So
it's like that's like Carl Lewis running.
I'll say this: again, in PE, prolonged exposure, they start with the narrative, but then they start giving you in vivo exercises, right? So they start saying, okay, that stairwell that really scares you after like section 5, we want you to walk by it, right? After section 6, we want you to walk through it. Right, so it's escalate. You build up to it, right? You don't just drop the hammer on day one.
Right.
I'll give you a personal example. It's not a PTSD. It's a fear response, right?
Okay.
I was in Tokyo, Japan. I was in Tokyo Tower, and they have these glass floors where you can see through it.
I was just about to talk about it. Go ahead. I'll ask you the question.
And I've done hike. I've skydived before, but it's been a while since I was high. And this was like 2 years ago, and I was gonna walk and my body froze, and I didn't know why. I was like, what the heck? I was kind of pissed.
Right.
And my wife was there with me, and I was like, yo, what's going? She was like, what's going on? I was like, hey, for some reason, my body doesn't want to move. So what I did is that I circled that glass floor like 5 times, and then I cut a corner. I put my foot on the glass, and then I kept going. I kept going until I fully walked on it, little by little, inching myself there. I didn't want to leave that glass alone until I walked over it.
Right.
And so, because I knew if I walked away from that situation, next time it'd only get harder. Because the more you avoid it, the harder it starts getting.
Okay.
Right. Because I'm programming my brain, hey, that's dangerous.
Right.
And I mean, honestly, a glass floor is kind of dangerous. It was pretty thick. But I mean, who in the right mind wants to walk through a glass floor?
Right.
Right. And so, I didn't want to walk away from that situation because I felt like I was going to start feeding into that fear.
Gotcha. And this is what I was going to ask you, because some people have common fears, right? And some fears are not based on trauma. Do you think all fears are based on? Okay.
No. That's a hard question, right?
Right.
When we think of trauma, like how are we defining it, right? Because trauma really comes down to situations where your life's at risk, right?
Like say public speaking.
So public speaking, the big fear, right? There's no real trauma behind it unless you were like super bullied as a kid, right? It kind of does stem from somewhere though. Nothing's not for any reason, not for no reason.
Right.
There's probably a story behind it, but it doesn't have to be traumatic. I guess I could say, right? It has to be something that really caused a lot of distress, right? And that doesn't make it traumatic, right? That's the big argument. We're like, what is traumatic? Right now in the DSM-5 on the book How We Diagnose People. It has to be life-threatening, and you can experience it, but your loved one can tell you they almost experienced it, and you can get it that way. But you can't like look out on a phone and see someone go through something, and now you're traumatized by that. Like that doesn't qualify, right?
Right.
So it's kind of, they're really trying really hard to define it because some people they say they get bullied at work, and they'll say they got PTSD, and technically that doesn't meet the criteria, right? So it has to be life-threatening. Your life has to be at a threat, or sexual assault, right? You might not die from sexual assault, but you are getting severely violated, right? So it's almost like the death of your ego at that point, right? So for a situation to be traumatic, and that's kind of like part of my study is really looking at how to separate things that are traumatic, stressful, right? And that's the thing, when we look at discrimination, you can get discriminated, but your life might not be at threatened, right? It could definitely be threatened, but you can be discriminated and your life's not being threatened. But what's the stress that comes with that? Right?
It's a heightened sense of fear.
It's a heightened sense of loss of security, of being able to, like, having a place in the world and being respected as an individual. Right. And so in my study, just to go a little bit deeper, when we look at cardiovascular diseases, right? Again, trauma. 70% of people recover from it, right? It mostly affects our brain, psychological trauma, unless you got an injury. But stress, right, when it's chronic, it starts wearing and tearing on your body. It wears and tears and wears and tears, and that's what causes cardiovascular diseases. That wear and tear, day in and day out, right? That heightened stress response always on and you're not being able to turn it off, it's causing all the resources that allow our body to keep living, to keep reproducing cells, to digest. All those resources are going to our stress response, right, to keep us alive.
Right. Man, you kind of gave me another
aha
moment.
We should talk more often.
You need to talk to somebody.
This one I could kind of pitching because when I asked you the question about the addiction part earlier, and you're relating that to heart disease and being in stressful situations all the time, is you need an escape.
Yeah.
But the escape is, it sounds like you're saying, is necessary.
In turn,
it's necessary.
Yes.
But too much of it could be a bad thing,
No,
right?
The choice on what you do
to escape.
So
I
be harmful.
I wouldn't even say escape. We need to return to homeostasis.
Okay.
Right? We need to return to a state of relaxation. We need to quiet down that stress response. And the thing is, when most people are high, their stress response is still on, but mentally it quiets down, right? Okay. But yeah, we need at some point. It's okay. This, this analogy. It's like a car and an oil change, right? We need to change our car oil every 3 to 6 months.
Right.
But if we wait every year to change that oil, that car's gonna break down a lot quicker.
Right.
You can think of your oil change once you relax and your heart decreases and your parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest response, turns on, because that's when all your cells start duplicating. That's when you start digesting your food. That's when all the processes that literally keep you alive in a state of just relaxation work. When we're stressed, all the blood, all the resources go to our major muscles, speed up our heart, because now it thinks we're in danger. We're getting chased by a lion or a bear. So we don't got to worry about digesting our food. We got to worry about running, being quick, fighting. Right. And so all the resources are going to those functions, but those functions are not the ones that keep us sustainably alive long term. Right.
It's just survival in that moment.
Exactly.
Right. So it's like constant survival.
Exactly.
Right.
And And so in terms of stress and trauma, right? And so that stress, that survival mode, it's not keeping our cardiovascular functioning optimally. It's just doing short term, right? And so we get stuck there. That's when we start getting these cardiovascular, because inflammation goes up, everything goes up, because it's like you're just revving the engine all day.
Right.
Right.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. You're not chilling off the gas. You kind of gotta let it roll.
You ain't cruising. You're
not cruising.
So this leads me to so this question here, because you say like being at cruise mode is healthy, right?
Yes.
So and it's like, what would you suggest? And I'm going to talk about drugs, like drugs in terms of illegal drugs. Now, some people do take certain types of drugs.
You mean like supplements?
Not supplements, but like over-the-counter drugs. Okay. Right. That the doctor would actually, because some people are against it because they say it's bad for your health, but it actually does kind of like calm you down or get you in that homeostasis. Yeah. Unnaturally. Would you say, but it's addictive?
But it's addictive?
Yeah. Some of these
drugs. You don't even have to say all that. Look, right. I told you, what got me into this was learning how to manage stress, right? Right. And I mean, I'll use supplements, I'll use things to help, but the goal is to just do it without just me and myself.
So you would suggest that's how you want to manage
stress? Yeah, I mean, in the natural state, because then let's say you run out, now or they don't make it anymore, right? Or they find that it is bad for your health after 20 years, it actually starts killing you, right? So essentially, I feel like God gave us everything that we need from day one.
100%, yeah.
So it's really about us becoming aware, right? Connecting to it, because that's how I feel God sheds his light. It's his power of awareness. And if we use that to become aware of this vessel that he's given us, right? And how it works, and everything is unique, right? Realizing how this thing to the finest detail, right? Not just overlooking it, generalizing, just really seeing how this thing is functioning, right? And that takes time. I feel at that point, in certain situations, you know how to get back to that peace, that tranquility, that serenity, that thing that brings us back to homeostasis, right? But when you're chasing an idea that you've seen on social media, that your friend told you about, hey, the supplement, it'll hook you up, bro. Like it might, but like long term, like is it how effective is it gonna be in the course of a lifetime, right? So finding
Yeah.
these, and that's the thing. That's why I teach the breathing.
Yeah. So I mean that's something I was kind of like, because I know like there's a prevalence, and as he said with addiction, there's a prevalence of especially when you're in college and stuff. You're here to study people to get that focus. We take these supplements and stuff, right?
Like ADHD. I mean, like Adderall and
all that stuff. Yeah. So
well, before we get into that, we want to pay the bills real quick. We're going to take a quick 30-second commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Have you heard about the Hope for Home Ownership Research Program? It allows you to 3.5%.
He knows the stuff, man. He knows the stuff.
And it does not slow down your research loan process. Just like other research projects, you are paid to be a part of the study. This income is eligible for use on your home purchase to cover such things as down payment, rate buy down, or even debt payoff. Spend it or save it as you see fit. Oh, by the way, the average participant also receives an additional $12,000 after closing through the residential clean energy tax credit. If you could use up to $13,000 to help purchase a home, you could benefit from an additional increase.
I'm playing, man, but yeah, it's a good conversation.
AHAgroup.org/Clinton619-3849269 for more information.
Okay, we're back with Mr. Alberto Gomez. Pretty soon, Dr. Gomez. And we're talking about trauma and how that affects our daily life and things of that nature. So before we went to our commercial break, Clinton had a question.
A question.
Or a statement.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things that we've seen is that there's a huge opioid crisis right now, right? And everybody's trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we deal with this, right? And it seems like there's a gateway that everybody's kind of going into where, as you said, the escapism is everything you talk about is kind of like what do you see when you talk to a lot of people in that who are addicted with addictions, the escapism, right? They're trying to escape the reality of life, the stress of life. And it starts where the doctor might have, or they had chronic pain, it wasn't prescribed to them, and then it becomes addictive, right?
Yeah.
Because it's they're trying to get back to that homeostasis all the time.
Yeah.
Now, because I'm just looking at this, if it's done naturally, is there a level of homeostasis that's bad for you? Like, I mean, or
the level of homeostasis that's bad for you,
right?
When you finally see that lion and your heart's not increasing in speed,
right?
So there's a reason we have a stress response, and it's useful. We don't want to take that away from people. You know? That's not the idea. The idea is that your stress response can turn on really quickly, right? Just as quick as it turns on, we want that to turn off just as quickly too. Right?
Gotcha.
It's when you get stuck in that stress response and you can't come out of it, right? That's when the damage starts causing. So stress is not a bad thing, right? That's a kind of an idea that people have, that stress is bad.
Right.
But you go to the gym, Clinton.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You're stressing out your body when you do that.
Yeah.
And when you stress it out and you get out of the gym, now you're going into that recovery mode. True. Right, you got to give yourself that recovery mode so you can actually keep your gains. Yeah. Right. So the recovery is just as important as the stress. Right. It's about creating that balance.
But see, the thing is, I'm glad you brought up the gym because I don't go to the gym for the pump. I'm too old for that. I have to pump up and stuff. I'm too old for that beach stuff, beach body stuff. But for me, it's meant. I'm status now.
I'm getting there.
I'm status.
I'm big growth.
But what I was saying is that mental. That's what I go for.
Yeah, you do it to flex your autonomic nervous system. Right. You're doing it, and you probably don't even realize it. You're doing it.
Explain what's that? The
autonomic nervous system. Yeah. So that is the nerve. That's part of a branch of our nervous system, right? Our nervous system has different branches. Our nervous system is how all our nerves and our neurons are connected. Basically, our brain is it's a big bundle of connections that are a chemical electro. and they go throughout our body. When we control our hands, those are the nerves doing it, right?
Mhm.
But there's an automatic part of it, an autonomic nervous system,
Right.
right? And that automatic part is attached to organs, parts of our body. You know, your heart is beating right now, but you're not making it beat. It's just doing it on its own.
Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah.
You're breathing. You're not controlling it. You're breathing. It's doing it on its own. There's a bunch of automatic processes. And so the autonomic nervous system is also broken up into two branches, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. The sympathetic is that stress response.
Mhm.
The parasympathetic is that rest and digest. So that stress response, what it focuses on, again, is keeping us alive during those attacks by lions and bears,
Mhm.
right? So our pupils get dilated so we can get more light into our eyes. Our hands get sweaty so we can grip. All the blood temperature, the temperature on the fingertips, the blood in our fingertips goes away from our fingertips because we don't need blood in our fingertips when we're in danger by a physical attack. We need it in our
That's
big
true.
major muscles,
Yeah.
right? And so all of these connections that are attached to the sympathetic nervous system, how should I say this? They shift all the resources. So all the oxygen, all the blood that is going to our body, certain parts in our parasympathetic, they shift it to different parts of our body, or in different ways to that certain part of our body, to get us to be able to move and keep us alive in terms of actual physical danger attacking us.
Mhm.
In terms of parasympathetic, you know, that's when the blood goes to the stomach. It starts focusing on digesting food, getting those nutrients to the rest of our body. It starts focusing on constricting our pupils, right? So keeping our hands warm, right? Because we'll start losing fingers if they get too cold and there's not enough blood circulating to them.
Mhm.
So it's different processes in these two branches. And so when we get stuck in that sympathetic, that stress response,
Mhm.
right? Because our brain is interpreting, it's perceiving stress, danger. So it's keeping us in that sympathetic. It then tends to destroy all the other parts, right? A lot of people, when they're very anxious, they start having stomach issues. Why is that? Because they're in a stress response and the blood's not going to their
Right.
gut to
That's where
digest.
you get ulcers, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
right. And so
That's
you get
good.
ulcers, you can get IBS. There's a whole line of issues you can get from not being able to manage that stress, right? And so being able to get your stress response to turn on when you want it and turn
Mhm.
off when you don't need it anymore, right?
So let me hit you on some of this. All right. So our subject of a lot of our conversations for the show is what we say outside of choosing God as the most important decision you make in your life. The other two is the career you choose and the person you marry. Are you able to hit on those choices and working in an environment and creating, or basically choosing a person to marry and choosing a career to go into when it comes to
That stress response.
yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's kind of like a joke, I just said. But the joke was down real quick. The joke said, "Hey, you know, this wife asked her husband, is a man more powerful than a woman?" And he was like, "No, a woman's more powerful." And she's like, "Why?" She's like, "Well, when a man dies, it takes like 7 or 4 people to carry him to his grave, while a woman does that by just marrying him."
Wow.
So, joke. Disclaimer, joke.
Anyways, so I mean, so when it comes to stress, I mean, you know, relationships can be very stressful,
Right.
I don't think it's no accident that like 50% of marriages end in the first 5 years.
Mhm.
Right? I think that's people
The
like
first 5 years, really?
in the first 50% in the first 5 years of marriage.
Wow. Okay.
So 50% of people are don't even get past 5 years in their marriage. I think that's them looking for their escape, honestly, right? They made a decision, and after 5 years, they couldn't find a way to reach homeostasis with this individual, and they said, "All right, I'm out." And in terms of work, right? Most people, when they're experiencing chronic stress, it's from their jobs, right? And I would say for those both situations, I would say marry who you love and work, do what you love as work, right?
Right.
But the thing is, a lot of times we think we love somebody, we think we love this job, and after some time we're like, I can't take this anymore.
Right.
So
That's yes.
and so
we get stuck in that lust phase that
yeah.
ends real quick.
And so and that's all okay, right?
Yeah.
That's all okay as long as you have some level of self-awareness, right? That's why
Right.
I'm stressing that, right?
Mhm.
We have these emotions, we have these feelings, you start having these thoughts. If you can be the observer
Right.
and watch yourself, right? You won't make that rash decision like, okay, now I need to marry this person, right?
Right.
You're able to watch it and let it play out, and then make some more logical decision about how you want to spend the rest of your life with this individual. When it comes to work, right? Most of the time we're getting into a job we need to get because we need to make money,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
We're trying to survive,
Right.
right? And
I'm stressed because I'm broke.
yeah,
Right.
And so sometimes
Right.
that's necessary, right?
Right.
You won't be able to eat.
True.
But if you
Sure.
have a certain level of self-awareness, again, just instead of falling into your patterns, just watching how things are playing out, while you're doing this job, start finding what you actually think you would actually enjoy doing. Don't even think about the money aside. Like, how do you like spending your time and your days? And there's so many jobs out there, right?
Mhm.
And if there isn't one that you think would benefit, you can probably create it because there's probably a list of people that
Sure.
are down to do it too,
True.
right? We live in a very unique generation where you could just paint and record yourself and put it on the internet and make money.
That is
Right.
very true.
Even though artists,
Job description influencer.
even though artists make a ton of money if
Yeah.
they're good at it, right?
Yeah.
But essentially, really finding a career, a job where it doesn't feel like work, right? But that takes a lot of self-awareness. That takes a lot of time sitting with yourself and not getting caught up in your patterns and thinking, oh, I like this because I do it all the time. It's
Right.
like, no, you're doing that because you feel like you need to,
Right.
And again, that besides just sitting with yourself, is sitting with yourself in a state of homeostasis, right? If you're sitting with yourself in a state of stress, you're not going to make clear decisions.
Right.
You're going to make some impulsive, desperate decisions,
Right.
right? But when you're sitting with yourself, when you're calm, when you feel like you're learning about yourself, that's when answers start popping up for you, right?
Yeah.
That's when you start unlocking some of those thoughts and things you used to believe or whatever. They just become more clear to you.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
when it comes to, I'm sorry, you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, you hit on some of the quotes when you said self-awareness, because it's kind of like we're the only species that God created with that,
Yeah.
right? That skill. So
Yeah.
in terms of self-awareness and using that as a tool to actually get out of stress, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that there's levels of that? Because I mean, you have people who do the ice bath, there are people who do the saunas, and then they also stress their bodies out where they can stay in freezing, like the monks can stay in like freezing without any half naked and not freeze to death.
Yeah.
Or get so would you say that you have to practice takes you to different levels of that, where you can control that part of your brain where nobody really taps into or gets hard to tap into?
I think there's definitely levels of self-awareness. I think and I think you never actually reach the end.
Right.
I'm personally in my journey, I feel like the more I try to dive deeper, the more and more my belief in God is I don't got evidence, but I'm like, yo, there's a point of no denying.
Right.
Right. That is the universal intelligence. Right. That's what I believe what is our connection to God. Right.
Right.
Being tapped into that self-awareness, that observing, right? And it becomes really challenging because it's all part of it is detaching from yourself, from your thoughts and your ideas, and realizing that these are just happening in me because this is the body that God chose me to be in.
Right.
Right. So some people look at it as a burden. I see it as a responsibility.
So how does one detach themselves or observe themselves?
I don't think we fully ever do, but we create some distance again to watch ourselves. So you asked how?
Because you were saying like watch yourself. So
So
how does one consciously do that?
So my practice consciously, right? That's the hard part. How do you watch that? I meditate on a daily basis, right?
Mhm.
I teach the participants a breathing exercise.
Mhm.
There's a Dr. John Kabat-Zinn. He is trying to remember what kind of doctor he is, but he's got a book on the principles of mindfulness, and he's teach people about mindfulness in this practice. And so uh, there's a video of him on YouTube, and he talks about a mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And a lot of people, when you ask them what's the most biggest thing you got out of it, and they say the breathing, and he goes, "What do you mean the breathing? You've been breathing your whole life."
Mhm.
But what he really explains is that they become intimate with their breathing, right? So that moment when you're breathing, it's having that relationship where it doesn't feel like, oh, it's just another breath, right? It's really coming to the moment where you're realizing everything is happening for the first time, right? There is no such thing as the past or the future, really. It's just this, right? And becoming aware that this body and this mind is part of this moment, but what we really truly are is bigger than this moment, right? And so observing that, really, it takes just you watching your thoughts and not fighting them, just letting them stroll by. And the thing about the mind, it loves attention. It loves attention and loves to be right. So like after a while where you're not getting pushed or pulled by your thoughts, it starts hitting you low. It'll hit you with a thought that you haven't even thought about in years to really get your attention.
Right.
So the mind does this little trick where it really tries to become the center of attention when it's just the mind isn't the master of us, right? Not unless we let it, right? The mind is meant to serve us,
Right.
right? And so a lot of people,
But we're not taught how to do that.
we're not taught how to
Right,
do that.
so-
No, not at all, right?
Yeah.
And we learn it from everybody else, and we really, for most of us, we're slaves to our thoughts and our feelings. We never learn how to like take a stand and be like, all right, I'm gonna let you have your hissy fit mind, but at the end of the day, you're here to serve me, right? And so that takes a lot of discipline, takes a lot of self-compassion, a lot of grace, because the thoughts it's okay, mind, I get why you're doing this, right? It's having a relationship where you can accept yourself more than anything.
Right.
But at the end of the day, really try to stay aware to not force it in any one other direction from the other, right? So I'll just give you the list of the 7 principles of mindfulness so you can kind of get an idea of the practice, right? The first one is non-judgment, right?
Right.
So not judging anything as good or bad, or when the thought comes, that's a bad thought. That's a good, not judging it, just letting it happen. Second one is patience, right? Sitting with it and not trying to go to the next moment, not waiting. Third one is beginner's mindset. So seeing everything as if it was the first time. The fourth one is trust, right?
Right.
Feeling your intuition and trusting it. Feeling these feelings and trusting that they actually do bring some value. The fifth one is non-striving, right? So that's the one a lot of us get caught up in. We now have this information. Now we want to do something with it.
Right.
It's about no, just chill with it. And then the sixth one and the seventh one, they actually all those first 5 they can happen in different orders, but 6 and 7 have to happen one after the other. So 6 is acceptance. So after you get all of this information, accepting it, and the 7th is letting it go, right? Because when we start carrying this, we're carrying this baggage, and it can happen in thoughts. Thoughts is the most challenging part, but it can happen with feelings. It can happen with interactions, situations, experiences, right? It's how we carry these things, right? And if we just kind of let it all go, and now it's like we're like little kids again. That's why I think kids are the purest thing in this planet.
So how does one deal with people in their life who are dealing with stress?
How do we deal with them?
How does one deal with them? You recognize that this family member or friend, whomever, has trauma because just in what they're doing.
Yeah.
How does the individual relate to them or connect with them or have, how does one handle that?
The same way you do it for yourself. You give them grace. Give yourself grace. Give them grace. Give them some compassion. I'm not saying now, get on your knees and what do you want? I'll do anything for you.
Right.
No, give them grace. They're another human soul in this planet, just like us, trying to figure it out, doing the best they can, right?
Right.
And really bringing that understanding brings ourselves more comfort than that person.
Okay, so y'all pray for me because I'm petty Pendergrass when it comes to.
Hey, you deserve grace for that too, right?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Right.
But you're self-aware of that, right?
Right.
You notice that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
And so there it is. This is the trick. Watching it and not trying to force it, but you're aware of it naturally.
right.
You know what the best decision is. You don't gotta force yourself, but it's about accepting it, giving yourself grace, right?
I think
Makes
that's
sense,
part
right?
that's part of the overcoming trauma too, right? It's kind of understanding that you're doing the best you can with what you have, right? To that point. Now the top three that you just said about the overcoming stresses, kind of, it seems like it has to do with time, right? So it's kind of like we create this time that where we have to get things done. Is this deadlines and all this stuff?
Yeah, we gotta.
So it's kind of, and that's hard. That's the hard part because now you're telling me, hey, there's no deadline. Okay, tell your boss that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I gotta close this deal in 14 days. Yeah.
I'm no stress. You know what I'm saying? But this is what I kind of can get from that is that we've kind of evolved as human beings. Like we say it's generational and stuff. Because I go back to, and we only have a couple of more minutes, but I go back to like when the pyramids were built, right? Civilization. They built some amazing, and still today we can't understand how they did it. But I think, and then they didn't have the English language. They didn't have a lot of tools we have today. Like, so we don't know. Like, we're still trying to figure it out, right? Because, but when you look at how they communicated and told stories, it was all visual and hieroglyphics, right? So, I think one of the things that you're saying is that I think that's kind of like what they had, and it's kind of been lost, right? Where they were more in tune with, because they didn't have the time construct stuff. You know, they were more in tune with that, a sense that of that they of more being self-aware.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
they were able to tap into that where we kind of put blockers on because it's people think it's holistic. You know?
I don't even think it's blockers.
Right.
I think that we get fed so much information, we let the world tell us who we are.
Right.
Instead of literally sitting with ourselves and deciding who we are.
Right.
Right. We watch movies where they show Black young men and
Right.
how do they portray them? Right.
Sure.
There's a reason why when you ask most 10-year-old Black kids growing up in the US, what do you want to be when you want to grow up? A basketball player or a rapper, right? It's what they're being exposed to.
Right.
Right. When you don't have TV, you don't have media feeding you this information. It's like, all right, what do I want to be? The brain works completely different.
Right.
Right. We don't have these associations. It's not the quick answer. That's not intelligence, right?
Right.
That black and white answer, that's not real intelligence. Intelligence is creativity.
Right.
Right. And so I feel like all this media, all this stuff that gets shoved in our heads by an early age, it kind of takes away the creativity. Right. And you know, they say that creativity, nothing's really creative. We're just remaking things from the past and combining with other things, right?
Sure.
But I don't know, put somebody in a situation where they're not getting exposure from the outside world, and I'd be curious to see what they could come up with, right?
True. That's very true.
So, in terms of the Egyptians, yeah, they were on another level.
Way out of level. You know?
Yeah.
And still we can't understand, but at the same time they were human beings, right? So that's what we know. We can guarantee they were like human. But it's how their way of thinking and how they thought was way beyond their time, right?
Yeah.
Like, so how did they get to that point and what took it away? That's the thing about that. I'm always kind of like trying to figure out. It's like they were the ones who kind of looked at the stars and determined, you know, like how to put things and line things up with the stars and stuff like that. But yeah,
we got a comment from Deborah McKay telling
this is creativity.
It
You're
is.
right, Deborah.
It is.
That is true. That is very true.
Yeah.
I like left and right brain, you'd say, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I think you can be more creative if you use both sides of your brain, though.
Right.
But
right.
Yeah.
Very
They
true.
do say your left side. Yeah.
You use 100% of it.
A few days ago, I was talking to some of the people I work with. We were at Balboa Park, and we saw some kids out there, and we were discussing that specifically young boys. A lot of times they say young boys have ADHD,
Mhm.
and I look at it as they probably, or autism or whatever, and they probably, some cases don't, but you're putting them in confines of school where you got to sit down,
Oh, yeah.
do this.
Yeah, true.
They're at an age where it's like, I need to be
Yeah.
They're
active.
They're over pathologizing kids these days.
Right.
They're
So-
over pathologizing everything, right?
Mhm.
Now that we have the general public has this information, but even in the professional setting, you know, most of America is systems, right? We got the healthcare system, we got all these systems, and the school system and how they play out. It's like they look at a person, they're like, all right, you go to that side or that side, and they kind of determine your future based on this
It's
decision.
just crazy, I think.
You know, the classroom, I mean, it's a kind of stressful environment, if you ask me. These kids are not in homeostasis, right? They got to sit in this desk for 8 hours a day. We'll let you run around outside for 30 minutes, but you got to get back and do your math after. Like, so, you know, it's kind of ridiculous to say, oh, this kid can't sit still past hour 3, so he must have ADHD, right? Instead of really learning and like, that's the thing. It would take too much resources to find each kid and see how they best learn, right? That would be the most best.
That would be ideal, yeah. And they go to a place that maximizes.
You know, and then I'm pretty sure that kid, when he graduates high school, he knows exactly what job he wants to do.
The only frustrating thing about this conversation is that we got to end it. Because it is almost.
You gotta stay within the constructed time, man.
Don't get too stressed, man.
I'm in homeostasis. But you know, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think you put a lot of, you know, new ideas in my head that I kind of had there, but then it's like, oh, that's what that was what I was trying to verbalize.
Yeah.
And so, Clinton, thanks for bringing Alberto. I'm looking forward to our after show.
And before real quick, tell people your next steps, what you're trying to do.
So I actually just did my last participant today, so I don't have to recruit, but I will be going to the Brooklyn VA this summer. After that, I'll graduate, get this PhD, and I don't know, maybe open a private practice. I do want to go into academia and do some more research, especially now in a time where they're kind of cutting funding for diverse groups. So figuring out a way to still get that information because it's needed.
It's needed, absolutely.
Is there a specific group you're trying to help?
Anybody that experiences trauma, which is a lot of people, man.
Okay.
Trauma and stress, and they struggle to get back on their feet.
Man, that is so needed. Well, we thank you for coming.
Thank you.
You know, if possible, we'd love to have you back again.
Yeah.
But you guys tune into an episode of Let's Talk About It. We'll see you guys same time, place in a couple weeks. Until then, peace. We out.
Peace.
Dr. T, I've been wanting to ask this question since he started talking. I want to ask you what you think about this.
I'm listening.
With what he was talking about, is the church talking